Welcome back to the Sex Reimagined Podcast. I'm Leah Piper, your Tantra expert, and I'm with the wonderful, the beautiful, the lovely Dr. Willow Brown, who represents the Tao.
Hey now. Okay, you guys, you're gonna love this interview today. We interviewed Dr. Juliana. We've had her on the show before. We're huge fans of her and her work. She's got a PhD in counseling education, experience teaching graduate therapists to be effective therapists, as well as background in teaching gender studies. She's licensed marriage and family therapist and a professional counselor, as well as a mother. And she has written sex positive education programs for her own business and for Planned Parenthood. She's run halfway houses for women in recovery. She's worked with sexual abuse survivors and sexual abusers as well, and has provided therapy for individuals, families, and couples. She was also a clinical director at a university's counseling center. And she is a wealth of wisdom. I mean, she's so fun to talk to. She's all about agency, sexual agency, to be able to choose and to really know what's right for you. So you're going to love this episode. She brings so much to the table, especially if you're a sexpert. You're really going to dig this episode a lot. So if you've been studying sexuality,
or if you're a parent,
there's some good stuff in here. You're going to dig it. So tune in, turn on, and fall in love with Dr. Juliana.
That's right. And after you listen to this episode, go back to episode 43 and get another dose of the beautiful Dr. Juliana.
Welcome to the Sex Reimagined Podcast, where sex is shame-free and pleasure-forward. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back. Yeah. Dr. Juliana's in the
Dr.
house.
Juliana.
Oh,
we
I'm so
love
glad.
interviewing her. She's just a wealth of wisdom. And since we had our last interview with you, you have done a TED Talk all on agency. We talked a lot about that on our last episode. And so go check that episode out if you have not been introduced to Dr. Juliana yet. She's just prolific in her ability to share with us about really anything about sexuality. So before we press record, we're like, what should we talk about today? And she's got some interesting things to share.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back. It's great to speak to you all.
Yeah. Let's drop in about what we were just chatting about. I'll let you kind of take it away.
Sure. So I was talking about one of the main understandings of holistic sexuality comes from a body of work and a graphic that's called the Circles of Sexuality. So this was an early introduction that I had to what I wanted to look at sexuality in a holistic way, which is something that I was drawn to. I knew that sexuality was just so much more than sex acts and who you're having sex with. So I started researching and looking at it, and I was able to go to this conference. And in the conference, I saw this graphic, and there was 5 different circles to it, and it was relationships, it was behaviors, and like sex acts, it was your identity, and in the middle of it was values. It had the word values, and that didn't sit right with me. I mean, I think a lot of us have a reaction to the negativity that some people have put between values and sexuality, that it often values means there's a right and there's a wrong. It's not really what they meant, but the visceral reaction to it is so big. I just knew it needed to be changed. And this was back in 2005 that I first saw this. Now, the graphic was made by a man named Dr. Dennis Staley in 1981. And, bless him for doing it back in the day. My belief is that there was probably a group of people who were doing it, but I could be wrong. And in 1981, this was revolutionary. Nobody was talking about holistic sexuality. So I want to give him props for starting the conversation and saying that back in 81, if you think about the political climate then, and it was vastly different. And it was not supportive of having even really any kind of great sexuality education. So big deal that he did it. But fast forward from 1981 to 2005, and there has been no change to it, really, is insanity to me that we have changed so much culturally. We've learned so much about sexuality. So in those decades, and nothing had been changed. I believe in the classics, but I also believe we need to change. So in 2005, I was starting off my career in sexuality at that point. I just wanted something different, but I didn't feel like I knew enough to who am I? I'm sure someone else has done this. And every year I just kept looking for something more. I was teaching sexuality at a college level, and I really wasn't seeing anything that hit what I wanted. So I started doing it, not thinking I would ever do anything national with it, but just for my own teaching. And I started looking at people who would describe themselves as having a fulfilling sexual life, however they define that, and just started taking notes about what that looked like. Then when I grew my work to realize that holistic sexuality was really looking at who you are, like the final frontier of self-development, I started looking at people and relationships that they would describe as fulfilling, sexuality to be a part of it. So I wanted to see if you are going to be a well-rounded, fulfilled person, what are the qualities and the areas that you needed to know about yourself and examine? And I realized the list was not very different. And so it in a way confirmed the theory that sexuality is the essence of who we are and, the core of who we are, almost inadvertently. So I started changing things and started adding, I took values out of it. I made my own graphic. When I look back at the graphic, it's, I feel the same way, like, oh gosh, this looks so antiquated before just even looking at it. But conceptually, it's definitely an advancement to what he did. And so I've
So,
been working with it. Yeah, please. Yeah.
like, what are the qualities that have repeated
Yeah.
themselves that
What are
are,
the circles that you've
yeah.
adjusted
Yeah.
to?
So,
Mm.
and some of them I kept from him. So sensuality,
Mhm.
health and reproduction,
Mm.
desire, pleasure,
Mhm.
identity. I call it intersections.
Is
And
desire and pleasure the same one?
they're
No,
different.
different.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
different. And then behaviors and practices, so sex acts and sexualization, which is the use of power, like the relationship between power and sexuality.
Mhm.
Then relationships and intimacy and love and connection, and then everything is agency. So originally, like if
Mm.
I had a similar look to the graphic,
Mhm.
that it was like something in the middle and then things on the outside, which is what he had done.
Mm.
And so replacing values with agency, because I talk about agency all the time.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I use all the other things as like at first my graphic almost looked like a wheel, like a bicycle wheel. That agency was the middle, and everything had a spokes coming out of it.
Mm.
Um, and I'll talk more about what that, and then I'll tell you where I am now with it. I've completely changed the graphic,
Mm.
and it has almost a 3D movable aspect to it at this point,
That makes
as
sense.
well.
Yeah. And
Would you
all
want me
of
to talk?
this
Yeah,
yeah. Is all of this in the book that you have coming out?
it
Yeah.
is.
Okay.
Yes, yeah,
Exciting. Can't
and
wait for that
it
book.
it. Thank you, and it feels. And I was saying to you all earlier that I had been interviewed recently by a UCLA student who was studying human sexuality. That was her major, and she's working with an ethical porn company called Afterglow. And about halfway through the interview, and sometimes you never know how people are responding to what you're saying, like if they have, because you learn as you're interviewed, like you all, that you have to have a bit of a blank face, so you're not interrupting, and it's for the sound quality of it. But sometimes it's hard to read if what you're saying is landing or not. So I really wasn't sure with her if it was landing or not. And she stopped me. She's like, "I need to stop the recording." I was like, "Oh gosh, okay, we'll see." With this young woman that's in the field is going to think about it. And she said, "Why aren't we being taught this? Why?"
Mm.
And she's like, "We
Yeah.
are absolutely being taught this 1981." And she didn't even know it was from 1981.
Mm.
And she's like, "We aren't even taught who came up with it. It just seems like it's always there. It's just one of those things. It's this classic circles of sexuality that we learn." She's like, "But you're right. It's absolutely outdated. Why aren't we
Mhm.
learning what you're talking about in this
Mhm.
process?" And that was pretty impactful to me as well,
Yeah.
to think that we not only need to be learning this on our own for our own individual journeys, but we really need to be educated for those who are in this field and those who
Yeah.
are supporting them. We need to have a much more integrated view of it. So, if not me, I don't know. Like it's always felt like I have no idea how I'm the one doing this, but no one else really was, or maybe there is someone
Mm.
else, and they are the same as me. It hasn't gotten published yet, and I'm sure
Mhm.
that's the case.
Mhm.
That there's someone else working on this. It's certainly not an original thought, but I've kept at it, and it's been very exciting and been a very helpful framework.
So, okay, I want to make sure I understand all these pieces. At first, what I thought you were saying was that, you know, you were asking people what the qualities that they think are important, and then this was the language that they were providing. But what I'm hearing you say is that these are the categories that we need to address, learn, be educated about, find ways to relate to these different categories. How does this fit my life? How does this fit my relationships? How does this fit my identity? And so it's really an education process of going, are we addressing these qualities as people become more sexually aware? And am I on the right track?
Yes, yeah, and it's both and. So I originally started with like almost like, what do I know? So I'm going to ask people. That's pretty much for how I began. So I did when anyone would describe themselves or when I would see them as someone who would have a fulfilling sexual life, those are the people that I really started asking these questions. And I didn't say, what do you think makes it fulfilling? I would talk about the parts of their life and ask them, what are the parts of
Mm,
your sexual life that are fulfilling? And I just started finding themes.
okay,
And I would have, if there were outliers, I ended up not including them because you really could make a very long list of things that make a
sure.
fulfilling sexual life, but that you can't do that with a theory. So I had to have groupings. And so when things became very clear and commonly a part of someone who I saw, or they would suggest that they were also fulfilling in their sexual lives, and then I also added in their life as just a human, their themes came up for sure. So that's how I landed on these.
I, I imagine that you heard like this, some similar stories over and over and over again. What
Yes.
were like the top two that kept on repeating
Stories from
themselves?
people.
Yeah, that gave them the feeling of fulfillment.
So a connection was an amazing, like it was in everything. People didn't use that word. And so I had to learn how to hear what they were talking about throughout it. And this was before Brene Brown really came on the scene, who talks about connection in such a common way for everyone to hear it. So
Right.
I heard it a lot though. And here's what I would say. And I'll answer the question about the two, connection being one. But what I learned was that it wasn't that there was a specific formula that everyone had who had a fulfilling sexual life, which wasn't surprising to me,
Sure.
but everyone had, so it was almost as if it was a recipe that I was finding. And it was a recipe that you could have 1 cup or you could have a teaspoon, but you had to have at least some of that in that. You always had to have sensuality, but you may have a lot of sensuality in your sexual life to be fulfilled, or you may have a little bit, but you can't be
Sure.
absent.
I like
And
that
so I
metaphor.
started finding those kinds of aspects of it. And then, of course, everyone has their own uniqueness. So everyone had a few outliers in theirs. But in general, the categories that I gave you are the ones that everyone had to have. So then I started then it was the second part of what you said of the understanding was once I had a theory going, I started using that as the framework. And that's how I started I used those topics as a way to do almost an audit on your sexual life and your sexual journey. And we do the history of it, and then we do the present, and we do both of that to inform you as to what are your strengths, what are your challenges, and where are you wanting to head? Like, what are the patterns in your life that you want to continue and to make sacred, and what are the patterns that you want to take out of your life and change?
Cool.
Wow.
So going
So
back to
that's
your,
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, yeah.
Keep going.
Uh,
Keep going.
I'd say that the second, so connection was one, and then I would say sensuality is something that I'm not sure. I would say like the I would put it as the most important, but I have found it to be one of the most potent.
Mm,
So people who come to my work already having quite being in touch with who they are as a sensual being, the way they would describe it is they don't necessarily need support in enhancing it, but they recognize it's a foundational aspect of who they are and how they are connecting with the world themselves and others. Or it's quite absent. And so it becomes this huge ground for us to work on, to build from, and they become quite awakened and hopeful because if they thought they were really out of touch with who they were as a sensual being or who they were as a sexual being, sensuality um, can be I don't love the word easy, but it can be a pretty gentle m- move into who you are as a sexual being, which all you need is a sprinkle of hope if you're going to start making changes. And so I have found sensuality and connection to be the very potent places.
cool. I
Mm,
love
I
that.
love that. Yeah. So this sounds like it could be really helpful sort of like intake for anyone who's working in the sexual field. Like when a new client comes in, let's check through each one of these categories. And it sounded like there was about 7 to 10 of them when
10.
you
Yes.
10.
Yeah.
Okay.
10.
And so just kind of going through them, like what has it been like in the past for you with sensuality or with connection, and how can we shift that circle so that, moving forward, there's more satisfaction for you in that arena. And one of the things you said early on, I can't remember the verbiage you used, but I just love it, is like that it's quintessential. Your sexual satisfaction is quintessential to your life satisfaction. Like it's kind of the foundation. If we look at it from the chakra perspective too, it is the foundation, right? Those lower two
Absolutely.
chakras. And so when we're fed and nourished as human physical beings in these bodies and on this planet, when we're nourished through connection and through touch and through sensuality and through these, all these different circles that you've come up with. I'm curious about how it's become 3D for you too. I want to hear more
Yes.
about that.
Yeah.
Then we just everything else, all the upper chakras that connect us to spirituality and mysticism and intuition and expression and love just come very easily.
Yes. Yes. Well stated. Yes, I agree with all of that. And it's so I think that this framework can be, as you said, it can be something for those who are trained in this to use as a litmus test of like, where's our starting point? What I have often found though is that we are so poorly educated just in general that a lot of people are like, what do you mean by sensuality? Like, what is that? So
Right.
it's also like the educate, like, what do you, sure, I know anatomy. Yeah, I got it. And then
But
when you
let's
get into
deepen
it,
and
that
define and
that's
really
right.
have like an embodied felt sense of what these things actually are. I was going to ask
Yes.
you about sensuality
Mhm.
because, when I think of sensuality, I think of the senses, right? We connect to the senses that help us bring us into presence and into our body and into an experience that
Yes.
allows sensation to then
Yes.
be felt.
Yes.
How would you describe it? How do you work with clients who, they have an idea, but they're not sure if it's the same idea you have?
Right. And part of what's important for me is that I always start off with I am an expert in sexuality, but not an expert of their sexuality or your sexuality. So I give like a general statement of what my concept of sensuality is, but I always invite them to expand it to what it means to them. But in
Cool.
general, the basis is it's your senses. And it is like not everyone has the same access to all of the senses, but we go through what they are. And I always start outside of sexual connection of like what touches bring you joy and pleasure and what do you desire. And we go through all of the senses in that. And it's it's been so fascinating and it was always unexpected. It's no longer unexpected, but it was for quite a long time how much grief comes up when I'm talking about sensuality with people who have not been in touch with what sensuality means.
Wow.
And so often there's a script, and especially for those who identify as women, that there is a way to be sensual, and they know exactly how to describe a woman who is sensual. When I work with those who identify as male, the word often is quite foreign to them. And how would it come out in a more stereotypical masculine way? So I have lots of like gendering to overcome, lots of stereotypes to overcome too. And there's often grief with that sometimes when you are looking at who you are as a sensual being, then it brings up that story, a pattern. I call those lighthouses, where you feel like you never had the right kind of sexuality, which a lot of people feel that way. There's a right and a wrong kind, and we never have the right kind.
Right.
And that begins with sensuality. So this is why it's the first pillar that we start at, sensuality. It gives me a pretty good litmus test of how they're feeling about themselves and their education level of what in more of an expanded, elevated way of looking at sexuality. And then a lot of my job at this point, if I'm working with them in a group or individually, is to normalize where they are. That there's no wrong place for us to begin. And this is a great way to start adopting the philosophy of curiosity being potent for you to expand, and how fun it is. And it is such a beautiful moment when someone goes from like, I mean, all right, like when do we get to health reproduction? Like sensuality is not for me. And then they cannot wait to say, I had the most amazing this, and this, and I love sunsets, and it does bring me joy. Or I love it when my vulva is touched this way, and I don't love it when my head is touched this way. And now I know. Sometimes some of the worst parts of examining your sexuality is answering, I don't know.
Right.
And I love turning the I don't knows, instead of it being a terrible place, a beautiful place to find out.
To be
Yeah.
curious, and to
Yeah.
discover.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel
Mhm.
like those are the moments of awe that people experience when it's like they're stepping into more of themselves in those moments when they oh yeah, that's really what I do enjoy and what I don't enjoy, and so that information makes them into more whole beings. It's really beautiful to
Yeah.
witness that. Now, you
Yeah.
were
It
talking
is.
about doing this in group environments.
Mhm.
So I bet I had like a flash of network chiropractic, where like
Yes.
the
Yeah.
chiropractor's working on one body and then another body starts going off on the table next door, and
Right.
there's just this like quantum network of connections going on. So I'm imagining in a group environment, that's kind of what's happening. Those moments of awe and like wonder and curiosity and wow are just like
Yeah.
sparking
And like
Yeah.
all over the place.
vulnerability and trust being like passing on, like the more people show
Mhm.
up in that revealing of themselves, it gives
Yeah.
more people permission to do the same thing. And then you're really weaving the trust among a little tribe. And it's so beautiful.
Yes.
I,
Mhm.
I love this idea of sensuality. It's not something that I don't think we've really poured into yet on
Mhm.
the show. And it's really what's coming to mind right now is it is really vast. There is a lot of territory there. And you're right.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful potential for gentle invitation to like start someplace because it's very non-threatening. When you think about the senses, that's something everyone can relate to, even if they're not strong in all the senses. However, they might
Mhm.
judge their competency to feel a certain sense or to utilize one.
Mhm.
There, people can still relate to it. They still have access to something. There's a common language. I think it's such a
Mhm.
beautiful starting point. And then from a group perspective, you've got people who are filling in. Like if you
Mhm.
don't, if you feel sort of numb, if you're not very embodied, if touch is something that isn't a happy, easy place for you, listening to someone else's description of how they feel touch and what it opens in them and or what it closes in them gives context for someone else to start to find their path forward with deepening their sense of sound or deepening the enjoyment of taste. But someone
Yes.
like me is like, oh my
Leah's
God,
a
savor
foodie.
all day long, like just make it yummy, honey. And Julia Child has this saying, she goes, I just don't understand people who don't like food. They're not my people. And there's a part of you that's like, if you're not into food, I don't know how to be your friend, which is really not true. But there's a sentiment, right, where it's like there's a
Yeah.
shared experience when it comes to things that you revel in. And how beautiful to find out that you do revel in a
Yes.
sense. They're like, you do
Yeah.
have a superpower with one or two or three. And then it points to if there's one that you're unfamiliar with or don't have a lot of connection to, it's like, well, now read the adventure. You get to
Yes.
start an adventure with that. It's so
And look how
uplifting.
it is. And look how the energy even shifted in us when you started talking about food and your joy and pleasure and desire with food and the sensualness of it. It made us have that feeling too. It is
Yeah,
contagious.
contagious.
And when you feel that and it's contagious in yourself and it's contagious if you're doing it around other people, then it starts planting that seed of getting it. And that, so maybe I can. Maybe
Yeah.
there is something to this. And then so again, like I find it to be just a wonderful starting point. And there's other like deeper levels too that I don't tell them at first. One of the things is that sensuality is one of the few of this that you have to be present minded, and you are present minded when you're in your senses.
Yeah.
And when you're present minded, then you're able to really connect to the core of who you are, the essence of who you are, and to meet your sexual self and your sexual energy. And that could be a little too much for some people if that's not already their vernacular, but it is a part of it. And so I start working with parts of like your yeses, I call them yucks and yums. And like we start asking through that. And And it's twofold. One is it gets them embodied, even if they don't know that's what's happening. It gets them thinking of yeses and nos, which are acts of agency, which again is what I'm trying to teach throughout all of this, to keep feeling into what becoming your own expert and trusting how your body tells you how to do this.
Yes. Like the inner guidance, that yuck and yum is
Yes.
a visceral sensation.
Yes.
And it's a felt sense. So you're not analyzing the yuck and yum. You're feeling
That's
fast.
right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Cool.
And I want to keep building that with purpose and intention throughout all of the other topics, so that when we are getting to some of the more soul, and they're all soul level, but when we're going to some of, like, when we're talking about connection, when we're talking about relationships and love, those are, you need to practice all of that to get to the place where you can truly do an analysis and an audit that is deep leveled and going to give you the nuggets that you need to learn, to really, like, elevate what you're doing in a sexual way. You can't start off that place, but sensuality has that entry point where you can. I want to give you an example. I told you all earlier that I just spoke to 7th and 8th graders and did a sex ed class with them. And it was in a Montessori school, so I wasn't bound by the public school rules. And I asked them, like, what are my parameters? And she really gave me almost 0.
Wow.
And kind of told me where they were starting from. And so I said to her, I was like, how would you feel if I didn't give them nuts and bolts, but I talked to them more kind of in theory about what sexual agency was and how to be embodied in things? And she's like, I don't even know what you're talking about, but sure, like, I'll trust you.
Yeah, I'll be in the class too.
Yes, yeah. And she was there. She was there,
Yeah.
actually. And and I admit, like, as someone who's been doing this for decades, I can't tell you how scared I was. Like, when I walked in,
Really?
it was like, just I felt, and it maybe scared isn't the right word. I mean, nervous, but I felt the weight of getting it right.
It's a different
Because
audience for sure.
It
Yeah.
is. And it was the first time in a long time I've tested looking at this in a deeper level to younger audiences. We started off with sensuality and talk about a group of people that may not know what sensuality is, or have a misconception. Although I did
Right.
have a boy say, "Isn't it just the 5 senses?" Like, yeah, okay, that's right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
There are many adults who don't say that. So,
Yeah,
yep, you're
yeah.
right. And so
Yeah.
I'll show you what I did. And this is it's just an example that I infused. So Revealed, the course, has lots of journal prompts. And so it's a sexual audit of your history, but it's also an education along the way too. And so I educate them kind of subtly throughout it. And one of the exercises I did with this group. So I had them all, like, put their arm, make sure they could touch their arm. And I taught them the four different types of touches that are taken from just basic Tantra touch. And so I taught them water with the movement that's a kind of a lighter touch, air that is barely touching, earth that has like a firmness to it,
Oh, I love
and then
the
fire
elements.
that has the unexpected to it.
Cool.
And so they all did it. And what I had them do is I said, we're gonna all do the touch one at a time, and you're gonna call out yuck or yum. And I want you to first pay attention to, how does your body tell you, I like this, I don't like this, this is a yuck, this is a yum. And I wasn't sure if they would do it. I wasn't sure if if they'd feel self-conscious owning it. There are plenty of adults who are nervous to share what they like and what they don't like. And they were just yelling out yuck, yum. And they had no problem sharing what
They were
that was
having
like.
fun.
Yes,
That's
they
great.
were.
Right.
And
Yeah,
each,
they
I
didn't
did
have
it
those
2
many
different.
hang-ups around
That is true.
feeling inner guidance and just
Yeah.
That's
like
right.
naming it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it similar to how when you were talking about food earlier, it became a contagiousness. And in between each one, I talked about, so how did your body tell you? How did you know to say yuck or yum? And it was interesting. Some had a lot of words to be able to say, my body did this, my body did that. Others are like, I don't know. And I'm very careful to never make either of that wrong or right. None of that is better. But we're
Mhm.
always wanting to hone that. And I talk about how, like, I have somebody that my mind-body connection didn't come easily to me. It's not a natural thing for me. I've worked on it. And there's some people that it's just like that they just come into this world and they know exactly.
Yeah, they have an
it's
aptitude for it.
That's right. That's not me. And so I talked to them about that and said, it's okay wherever you are with this. Sometimes it's just an instinct. It's a feeling. You're not working through your body. You're working through the feeling of that. That's okay too. And then I talked about, what was it like to have you be the one that was like, yuck, and everyone around you was like, yum. And it was really like a beautiful starting point too of, again, having agency that you get to have a yuck, even if everyone else is this is a yuck.
Yeah.
And I talked to them about, like, for me, one of the first few times I started doing this, air is something that I don't love that touch. And so if you were to like kind of do air on my back or whatever, it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
And I remember describing that in one of my first revealed groups. And this woman was like, "Are you serious? Because that is the yummiest thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
her
want
honey
everyone
spot.
to do that to me right
Yeah.
now." And we all talked about like how, like, what I wonder why. I wonder
Mhm.
why we're so different. And what is it about our bodies that make this so different? And isn't it wonderful that we get to be different and have that? And then I moved that forward about touch. And I did it very lightly with this group. But I said, so if you loved water here, you may not love water here or on your
Right.
genitals, or you may love fire here. And this one person, one of the kids was like, "I love fire. And I think I love fire everywhere." And there was a little bit of joking about it. We'd already made a rule that it was okay to laugh and, giggle and all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
But it was the creeping in of like, uh-oh, am I wrong? Is this
Right.
weird? And like, if
Right.
I like fire, does that mean like, I like kink, or is that weird if I like kink? And all
Yeah,
of
like
those
a
tributaries.
shame bubble rises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
my
an
gosh.
environment where
So
there
amazing.
wasn't any shame.
Yeah.
We really had a very safe environment, and everyone was happy and feeling that way. And so I wasn't able to really go into it very, very deeply. I only had an hour with them, but I was able to make the point. We'll see what happens if the seeds are planted. But when I do revealed in the group, we do go very far into that place of like, so what is this bringing up for you? And what
Mhm.
is the self-judgment, or where are the messages where you got? Okay, so here's the thought. You like fire? You want to be pinched and slapped. And where is the messaging that that's wrong, that's bad, that's shameful? Where did that come from? And so we do like a decluttering of what those sexual messages are, so that we can give room to this. Or if you don't like fire, then is it truly that your body doesn't like it? Or have you been socialized that that's the wrong thing to do? Or
Mhm.
Right.
did you have
Mhm.
bad experiences where that wasn't done well and had a negative touch?
Sure.
And so we just take as much time as possible to dive into those areas. And that's just one example of sensuality, but we do that with every single one of those topics. And it feels endless where you can go. And when you heal these topics, and it's always felt confirmed that those are the high points. Those are the ones that you really want to be hitting and understanding about who you are, to have the potential, to meet the potential of having a fulfilling sexual life and a relationship with yourself.
Oh my
Well,
God, it's so amazing. I feel like, Juliana, you have to teach teachers how to teach sex ed now for
Yes.
across the country. I
yeah,
think
you're
this is
onto
like
something.
this
I
is going to
love
be the
this.
next chapter of your career at some point. It's the next chapter. So I'm so curious, one of the things that I see so many sexperts not paying attention to is the hormones, like the sexual reproductive health and stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm thrilled that is in the model, of course. It's such a huge component of it. And I'm just so curious what you've seen with sexperts as with these 10 categories. Like, what do you see a lot of people like missing or not? Like what
Like
are the
under
ones?
addressing, like
Yeah.
not, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's getting left off the table?
Yeah. What could we
I,
all as
yeah.
experts like do better
I
pay
mean,
attention
it's such a great question, and I've actually never been asked that. What I say overall is seeing it in a holistic lens. I think that's number one with the issue is a lot of people that I work with, and I understand it, is that a lot of sex works will become an expert at one thing.
to?
Right,
So
like
they are
orgasm, for instance,
that's right.
or
Or
a genre
uh,
like tantra or
mhm.
kink or something.
Yes, right. And again, I think we have to have experts within that. But
Sure,
in
specialists.
general,
Yeah.
yes. But what I would like is so if someone was an expert in tantra, what I would love is for that to then make sense as to how it fits into everything else. And there are certainly some teachers who do that. And it may not even be the best example, because tantra probably does that better than a lot of
Has more
areas.
of it. Yeah.
Yes,
Mhm.
a holistic sense to it. So I'll pull that out. Hormones. So or looking at the lifespan. Like right now, I do a lot of space in the menopause. I do a lot of work in the menopause space. And so of course hormones is a big part of that, sex is a big part of that, intimacy, all the changes, there's a whole lot that's happening, lack of education, everything is changing in our bodies, in our beliefs. And you do want to be an expert and know like, where are their solutions, where are the options to help people in where they want to move to it. But it needs to be put inside of it holistically. It needs to be like we need to be addressing. So who are you as a sensual being in this age, and how is that relating to your hormones? And what
Right.
is this meaning into your view of emotional intimacy? If your hormones and the shifting that's happening in your menopause journey, if you are having to have a relationship with your partner, and it's not working. You all have grown into two different kinds of people, and you are also trying to figure out what does this mean hormonally, and you're having shifts and all of that. It could be that it's changing how you're showing up, or it's changing what you need to feel safe to show up in emotional intimacy. And I'm not saying that if you're coming to somebody as an expert on how can you have hormonal relief in your menopause space and have that help improve not having sex, pain during sex, that person has to be able to speak to your emotional intimacy. But I do think it would be best practice to be able to say, so let's look at how this is threading it. Almost make it a spider web of sorts that at least you touch. And you, again, don't have, as a provider, don't have to be the expert of that, but you can say, this is a place you may want to go to next. Or,
Yeah.
And
to
have
be
some
like
referrals too.
that's right.
Yeah.
And have
Yeah.
referrals. And there's I dream all the time about what the perfect clinic would be. And what
Yes.
if I could have it, there
Me
could be
too.
this.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've got
And
the erotic empowerment center all set up in my mind.
yes. I'm coming to it, Willow. And I think because in some ways I feel so frustrated, at least with the Americanized system, and that, we need to have referrals because we don't have hubs. And, there's so many hurdles. And when you're talking about anything in the sexual world, if there's hurdles on top of hurdles, people just stop doing it. And then it becomes an underground network of the only way you get to find people is if it's a hush word of mouth of like, yeah, she's really good. I would love it to be that it's this huge building that it's just wonderful when you see someone in the parking lot instead of like hiding that you both are going to this place and there's a problem.
Right.
You have to have a referral source for that because you can't do what you're not an expert in, but you
Right.
need to know where your expertise fits into helping the whole person.
Yeah.
And so that would be like my first answer
Well,
to it.
I think this holistic approach is interesting, and one of the things we try to make a web, create a metrics for as we reimagine sexuality is to acknowledge that it affects every sector of our life. And so if we were just to take the menopause topic and go, as you start to experience relief due to the things that you're trying to help alleviate your original symptoms, now how does that affect how you feel at work? How does that affect the patients you have as a grandparent or a parent? How does that affect your moods? And then if your moods are changing, how does that affect, how you run your life? I think that people don't realize or don't think through the fact that sexuality, this idea of sexual well-being and wholeness, we started off that way. It is still affecting all these different channels of our existence. And that doesn't mean you have to be sexually active. It doesn't mean that you have to be having sex in order to be affected by sex. And that there's so much range of how you relate to your body, that you have so much more agency. You have so much more choice than I think people realize. And I'm just sitting here coming back to one of the words you said at the very beginning, which is hope. Because I think so many people feel broken when it comes to sex, when it comes to their ability to have relationships that are romantic in nature. They feel like a failure and they're embarrassed. And so reaching out and getting help, we haven't totally normalized that in the sexuality space. Thankfully, it's a little bit easier in the relationship space. But I think a lot of people, by the time they get help in their relationship, the relationship counselor is really just helping them break up because people don't get support earlier. I mean, go to a therapist when things are good and watch your relationship soar.
Yeah.
Don't wait until there's obstacles that have been brewing for years or decades.
Mhm.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm in this local women's group that we're all uh, business owners and sharing ideas and supporting each other. But I don't do a lot of local work. I do almost everything is either virtual or I travel to do my work. And it just started occurring to me like, well, maybe I should. Maybe I should make it a little bit easier for myself and do something that is only 5-minute drive. I
In
don't have to
person and local.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
I
You
We're
actually
gonna get
appreciate
touch
back to that.
people. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And
Yeah.
because it's been about 10 years since I've had an in-person practice. So I was talking to them and I was like, I want to start, as you said, like I do couples intensive. I want to start doing couples workshops. I've mentioned this to the group. And they're like, oh yeah, we would love to do it, Juliana, but we wouldn't do it. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, what? They're like, well, we wouldn't want anyone to think, like, I wouldn't want to see people that I know and think that we were having a problem with our sex life
Right.
or like whatever, like the rhetoric was in that. And,
Yeah.
and I just, they're
Right.
the hurdles again. And I get it. And I have so much compassion for it. I truly do understand that. And I would think that's the other part too, that in our training and supporting people in their sexual journeys is I often forget how comfortable I have become in so many areas. And that's just not what's out there.
That's not how everyone know it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many people
Mhm.
can't relate to that
Yeah.
yet. They
Yeah.
have,
We have to.
I
we
forget
have
that all
to
the time.
remember that in the community. Yeah.
And
I'm
we're in
like, I'll just do
California.
a workshop on pleasuring the pussy like a pro, and
Yeah.
everyone will
Yes.
come.
That's right.
I mean,
I'm like,
what's there not to be attracted to that?
why would that
I-
be scary and intimidating? I don't
I
know.
don't
That's
know,
like
yeah.
exciting. But yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I think sometimes, and I know you are in more of the middle of the country, and so your
Mhm.
perspective is probably would be really helpful here. Growing up in the Midwest, I grew up in Michigan, and I've now lived on the West Coast longer than I lived in Michigan at this point in my
Mhm.
life, and so I sometimes feel like I'm in a bubble, and you do forget, and I that concerns me because I
Mhm.
want to be able to speak a language that someone else can hear. And so there is that sort of, oh, by the way, if anyone's listening, you want to do a support group, we could do a mastermind. How do we, those of us around the coast who want to be able to relate and shift our language, and I have forgotten some, and it's something that I think a lot about because I think it's so important that we can share things in a way that people can hear. And I have to say, as you were talking about working with those 8th graders, that's what really jumped out at me, Juliana. I feel like you've got your thumb on the pulse of that, of being able to keep it simple
Yeah,
and
I think.
relatable.
Yeah, she's
and
got such a great language for
yeah, and
the
there's
masses to hear.
you're
Yeah.
great at really, sorry about that. There's a not only is it simplistic, easy to understand, easy to relate to. It's what's the thing I want to name? It's not too
I hope it's
intense.
accessible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
accessible. Like, because I was thinking about what you were saying, and it was, those parts of us that we don't feel in touch with, right? We could start
Mhm.
labeling that. Oh, maybe there was trauma. Oh, maybe there's just fear. Or when people are starting to have that experience of like, okay, am I the only one that had a yum? Am I the only one
Yes.
who had a yuck? And you start to have that shame bubble start to rise up, and you don't want to be othered. And and so you've been keeping it. Yeah. Okay, I'm signing up. You get this sex ed
Great.
training together, and I'm in. All that to
Perfect.
say,
Yes.
I'm in. Yeah.
Yes. Great.
It's so great, Juliana, because when I had my sexual trauma at 19, I was like, I am going to reform sexual education. And
That's
then
right.
I was like, fuck no, I'm not going to do that. But I did. I even went to like the local juvenile hall. I was 19 years old, and I went to the local juvenile hall and I spoke to them about the difference between consent and rape and the different shades of rape and all these, things. And
it's beautiful.
talked about pregnancy and teen pregnancy. And there was all these young kids, and I have no idea how they, digested what I was
Yeah.
talking about. And I don't even remember what I was talking about. But then I looked at like, wow, what would it mean to get into the school systems and really reform sexual education? And I decided, that's not my path. But
I get it.
like
Yes.
here we are full circle with like, I think these 10 circles that you're delivering, that you're offering to the world really could be like such a profound way to usher next generations into their beingness, into their wholeness through looking at these things, not only through sexuality, but like what about family, and what about friendship, and what
Yeah.
about all
Exactly.
all other sectors of life.
Yeah, I
Your
really
health.
Yeah,
see it
that's
like
the hope.
being delivered
Mhm.
in two ways. One is to the parents, one is
Mhm.
to the school administration, and then one is to the kids.
Yeah.
And that the curriculum and its language might shift a
Well, we
little
have
bit.
to put politics too, because politics dictate the
All of
administration
that.
and
Yeah.
Right.
all of that too. But yeah, I agree with you on that aspect. And for me, the Montessori way was the only way this was going to ever happen, because there's just so
Yeah.
much room, and they're built in agency as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's a part of it.
We'll start where we can.
Yes, yeah, and I unfortunately have to go pretty soon because I have a client, but I wanted to explain to you where I've switched things to. I'd love to see what you
Great.
think of this. And you
Yeah.
asked about what the model is. So, a while ago, I was able to hear Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra, and Eckhart Tolle speak on the same stage. It was really, really amazing, and lots of things, lots of things I remember from it. But one of the things was, and someone asked Wayne about Eckhart Tolle's like the power of now and what that meant. They were kind of just saying how do they influence each other since they were peers in many ways. And he said this one thing stood out for him, and he said that he started seeing the power of the cross, and was trying to understand like why that became such a religious symbol. If he, with him, he didn't necessarily believe that there was a literal story attached to it. And so what he came to was this belief that the horizontal part of the cross is the timeline, like the human timeline. This is our time from birth to death. And so that was our kind of trajectory from here to there. And then the vertical part of the cross is like the otherness to ourselves, and to however we would describe another kind of higher power, whatever word that would be in belief system. It could be heaven and hell, but in essence, it's just like your connection with your essence, in some ways. And so there's that, and that part, the intersection of where they meet is the power of the now. It is the present form of thing. And it always stood out to me. And I never was like, what does that have to do with any of my work? But I knew there was something in that stood out to me as really important. And then when I was doing more about like that, you need to be present minded to be an embodied person in sexuality in your essence, it started hitting me like, oh, there is that sweet point. Part of my course is that we do this timeline. So it started making sense to me too, why I was looking at that kind of that trajectory of things. So I changed it being from the circles of sexuality to really being a compass. And there's a lot of wordplay of direction and due north. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. And compass is used quite a bit. So at first I was like, oh, that's a little overused, but I honestly couldn't get away from it. So the graphic it has a horizontal and a vertical line that's really like the main points of things. And for that, sensuality, desire, and pleasure and connection are the four main points. So like the four direction parts of it, because those are the four that really are in the embodied, the present, the mindful, and the connection, the pathway. So those are the four parts of that. And then there's a little starburst that comes out of it. And that's health and reproduction, that's sexualization, that is behaviors and practices, and health and reproduction. Then on the inside of the starburst, so like where that middle point is, that's where agency lands. And so agency is the energy source in which everything comes out. And then I changed the word identities and the concept of identities to the word intersection. And I put that on the
Okay.
outside. And so intersections is, where you are landed in life. And so like just by genetics, it is your race, your socioeconomic status, even where what your family constellation is like, where you're geographically located, things you had nothing to do with, just you're born into. And then the second layer of intersections is where you've had a little bit more choice in. And what have you made more choices in changing or removing yourself, and how do all of those intersections affect and
Oh,
impact your
cool.
sexual self? And so that's on
Yeah.
the outside. And because I see sexuality as fluid and ever changing, the 3D form of that, the intersection, like the outside circle of it moves. So it's moving like this. And the rays, the four main rays and the smaller rays, get to move in and out as well. And so it moves like this, it moves around, and then it moves
Yeah.
out. And that allows for everyone to have their own model, which again is like my belief that everyone
There's
gets
the
to have their own
agency.
sexuality.
Yeah.
Right.
You can
Yes.
really
I
And
love it.
so
visualize the web coming together when you
Yes.
talk about those intersections.
Yeah.
It's like you see those
Yeah.
lines crossing and coming together. I love it.
Oh, I
Is
can
there
see
a
it.
place
Yeah.
people can
Yeah.
see this image? You
Nope, I'm
have?
still working on it. Not
Okay.
yet.
All right. All
Yeah,
right.
it's
In
it's
your
really
mind.
hard.
See it in your
Yes.
mind.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So
That's
we've been
great.
working with experts to make that happen because it's definitely what I want to have as a part of this.
Yeah.
Because the other part too, and the last kind of way I've kind of come to this is that it's important for me. Like you talked about this when I do revealed in a group or when I'm talking about it, is that it is absolutely life altering when you get to be in a vulnerable space, talking about anything in a vulnerable, true way, and you get to hear people who are different than you and similar to you that have similar experiences, different experiences, and all of you get to stand in the truth of who you are next to somebody in the truth of who they are, which is the ultimate, example of agency. And that shores up you. And it really
Yes.
shores up your instinct. It shores up you making good decisions. It allows you to expand instead of to minimize yourself, which we're all wanting and drawn to. And so when I think of like these globes, the compass inside of the globe that's moving around, it makes me think of like constellations. And that we are all just kind of like stars in the galaxy. We're all soul dust, and that's the good news. That's the rights. That's the responsibility, and that's the beauty of sexuality. And to me, that's the life force.
Yeah.
I love it. Oh my God.
yay.
Free up the life force, everybody.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Get
Yes,
your
yeah.
3D model on. What do you have a name for this? Does it have an overview name yet?
I think I'm just calling it. Well, we're working on it, but I
The
think
compass.
the holistic sexuality compass. The holistic.
Love it.
It's going to say
Something
holistic
like
something.
that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
And do you
that.
have a working
Good.
title right now for the book?
Revealed is in the name. We're working on. It's so interesting how we have to think of like so many other like marketing aspects of a
For
title
a book. I know. I think I'm going to have to
Yes.
change the name of my book too. Yeah. it's
Yeah.
not
because
gonna-
of the SEO. Yeah.
Mhm.
You have to be
Yeah.
able to make it so because I'm not like a household name. People won't search for me. And you
Right.
want them when they're searching for sexual, and no one's really looking up holistic sexuality or sexual
Right.
agency. So I have to
Right.
find the words
The
where
right
people are
word.
looking, so they'll find me inherently. And so
Yeah.
revealed will be in it. So
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, so everybody, we're going to make sure that we stay in touch with Dr. Juliana because we're huge
Great.
fans. So we will update the show notes as things evolve, as titles get confirmed, as books are published, and as
Yeah.
graphics are completed, so that
Great.
so that you will be up to date as she is up to date. Thank you
Mm,
so
beautiful.
much for
Oh,
just
thank
Such
you
a
all so much. Thank you
pleasure.
for your work. Thank you all for
we
what you
love
all
you.
are doing. It's so nice to see you always.
Yeah.
Great.
You
You
too. And don't
too.
forget to check out Dr. Juliana's first episode because you're going to love it.
And
it's,
don't forget to check out her TEDx talk. We'll put that in the show notes too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Good to see you all.
You bet.
Keep in
Love,
touch.
love.
Okay.
Now, our favorite part, the dish.
Well, isn't she just such a satisfying person to sit down and
And talk
chat
sexuality with?
God,
Yes,
I
she
always
is.
walk away with
I know.
pieces that come together even more beautifully. It's
Yeah.
not so much that she's bringing new concepts to me, but what she does is she uses language in such a fun way that she brings
Yeah.
cohesion. And it
Yeah.
really comes back to her mission around wholeness, seeing this as
Yeah.
a bigger picture.
Yeah. I mean, I think her curiosity and her willingness to keep discovering and to keep looking and to keep, admitting when she's like, oh wait, no, that's not right. Let's try this. Admitting when things aren't sitting right. And I mean, when you're in a body of work and you're developing something like a model or a theory or an approach or a methodology, there's so much desire to get it right, because you want to deliver the right thing to the world and
Right, of course.
to actually check yourself and go back and be like, actually, wait, this could be
That
even
doesn't
more
work.
evolved.
Yeah.
Is really, I just feel like it just, I honor it and I love it and I respect it so much. And I had to go through that myself. I mean, I had this methodology all laid out. I had all the videos done. I had everything done, and I had to go back and be like, shit, that's not right. I had to redo everything
Wow.
because it wasn't fully aligned to what it could
Wait,
be aligned to.
yeah. I think the other thing that this is where I wish I had gone in a more academic direction. It's really not in alignment with my soul. Like, I like being too much of a free
Yeah.
spirit. I like having agency over all of my time. And the idea of having to sit still and go to school is just, I don't know why it hasn't resonated, but I feel envious. I feel a sense of great, high regard for people who have an academic uh, aptitude.
Yeah.
And I think because I love hearing the research of things. And one of the
Mhm.
questions I wish I would have asked, and maybe when we have her on, we can talk about this part of research and how do you do research? How do you find people to answer these questions? How do you collect the data? How do you
Yeah.
get volunteers and people to sign up? And I know that that's a structure that you would find in universities, having exposure to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But being someone who has a great amount of experience, in fact, I think I have more experience than a lot of people who are in academia because they're less hands-on.
For sure
But
you do.
my
Yeah.
evidence is all anecdotal. I
Anecdotal. Yeah.
don't,
Well, it's
and I really
clinical.
wish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I wish I had both. And maybe that'll be the next iteration of my curiosity. Maybe that'll be the next thing that opens new doors. But I do really, um, I mean, that's what the draw to positive psychology was for me. It's that
Yeah.
idea of seeing researched, measured, based
Yeah.
facts.
It is very
It's
satisfying. Yeah.
thrilling. Yeah.
It
And
is.
I love the
Oh,
idea
well,
of going, well, we thought it was this. Turns out it's not,
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
to the drawing board.
Yeah. Totally. Well, I think it's very trustworthy. Like, people trust it. Scientific,
True
right?
credibility. Yeah.
And so that's why it feels so enticing. But then I totally hear you, and I love both too. And
Yeah.
for early on when I developed my approach and methodology, I really wanted to make it into studies and
Yeah.
have full, but I was like, I don't know where to find those people, who
Yeah.
put together studies, and I am not that person either. I'm not going to
Right.
put that together.
So if you're a researcher out there and you
yeah,
would like a
come with that.
project,
Yeah.
we got the ideas if you know how to implement.
Put
So
it
let's work
together.
together.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the anecdotal and the clinical experience, I think all of that, I think stories, because honestly, I mean, both are great, but
Yeah.
there's plenty of research out there. And I think stories are what people really connect
Yeah.
to,
We
and you're a
have
fantastic storyteller.
we're wired that way to understand through storytelling way more than we are wired to understand, big words
Through,
and
yeah,
dry, boring.
studies. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
I think that's why it doesn't capture a lot of people's attention. And one of the things I really connected to was her metaphor around the recipe that really individuates people's experiences, their preferences, the things that open them the biggest are the things in the recipe that are the greatest measurement. I really loved that as a metaphor. So don't be surprised, people, if I start you borrowing it. The last thing I just want to make a point in about what I was noticing in her sharing of the 8th graders and in other areas of the interview was when people start to relate with each other, I think there's a mirror neuron effect, right?
Yeah.
So when someone starts to open,
Mhm.
it shows you how to open.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know what mirror neurons are, when you see somebody yawn and then you yawn, that's a mirror neuron response. It's your body ends up mirroring what you're seeing another body do. Another example is you're watching something sad on television. It's actors. The dog really didn't die. But you can't help but cry because the people on the television are crying.
Mhm.
And so you cry too. Those are all mirror neuron examples.
Phenomenons. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was kind of interesting to see some of the emotional reactions and what she's so good at is creating safe space.
Yeah.
Is helping people stay curious when the temptation is to go judgmental.
Mm.
And how she reinforces that in her, you can tell as she's talking about her experiences with clients, you can tell as she was talking about teaching kids, that's such a crucial part of this sexuality exploration. I mean, it's such a pivotal thing for Sex Reimagined is that has to be forward moving at all times so that
Yeah.
people feel, free and safe to take the risk because it is fucking scary. No
Yeah.
one wants to be called a weirdo when it comes to sex.
No.
Unless that's your kink and you're not into it because you've done a shit ton of work probably. I don't mind being weird when it comes to sex now, but I sure as shit didn't want to be
To be
outed that
labeled.
way.
Yeah.
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 So again,
Yeah. Well,
bravo.
it is one of those like very, very sensitive, subjects in our life. It's
Yeah.
one of the most vulnerable subjects in our life. And so I think we all want to do it right and and be accepted for
Yeah.
our style and our way around
Right.
it. And so that can be very limiting.
Yeah.
So, that's why we love having sexperts like Juliana on our show because it just opens up so much more conversation and so much more possibility to
Yeah.
what you even think about exploring. It's like you don't know what you don't know. And so that's why we love to like highlight these experts so that you start to have new concepts and new ideas and like, oh yeah, let's look at all 10 categories. I loved the model, the 3D model and just
Mm.
the compass. It's so
Yeah.
perfect. I could see
Well,
it.
I
Beautiful.
think to just piggyback on what you're saying, which is this is why you sharing this episode with a friend is so important because our voices
Yeah.
can only reach so far. And our voices go further when you leave a review, when you like the show, when you subscribe, when you share a link to a specific episode that you really loved that someone else needs. So
Yeah.
please do your part in helping more ears get exposed and help us normalize a certain sex positivity so that people can open.
Yes.
Open.
Open, open, open. It's all in the name of expanding the sector of your life that makes every other sector of your life flow with more
Better.
ease and more grace. Yeah.
So with
Much
that,
love, y'all.
everyone, have a fabulous day
Ciao
or
for now.
night or morning.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode was hosted by Tantric Sex Master Coach and Positive Psychology Facilitator Leah Piper, as well as by Chinese and Functional Medicine Doctor and Taoist Sexology Teacher Dr. Willow Brown. Don't forget, your comments, likes, subscribes, and suggestions matter. Let's realize this new world together.